Hello everyone. Welcome to this YouTube live session on what is data science with Python. So we're starting this live series so that anyone can start off in the field of data science, and we'll be covering everything. So we'll be covering Python fundamentals, then we'll be looking at some interesting statistics and mathematical problems with Python, and then we'll also deep dive into implementing ML and data science algorithms with Python. So we'll start off by looking at the agenda in today's session. So we'll go ahead and see how to install Python, and then we'll look at some very basic fundamentals. So we'll understand what exactly are data types and variables in Python, and then we'll work with some Python operators. Going ahead, we have some very specific data structures in Python programming. We'll work with them, and then we'll work with flow control statements, which are basically your if-else statements and for loops. So this is the agenda, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this entire YT live series. So in today's session, it's only Python fundamentals. Going ahead, we'll be covering statistics, ML, data science, everything. So let's get started and let's install Python into our systems. So what I have over here is actually called as Google Colab. This is a cloud-based IDE, or basically a development environment where I can go ahead and write my Python code. Now, instead of running it on a cloud-based server, if you actually want to run Python in your local system or in your local machine without internet, then you can go ahead and download Python into your systems and also an IDE. Now, I'll just show you how it can be done. So just open up a new tab and write down download Python. And then this is the first link. So click on this. So click on the first link, which is python.org. And so Python is platform independent, so you can run it on whatever operating system you're using. So if you have a Windows machine, you can run Python on a Windows machine. If you have a Mac operating system, you can run it on a Mac. If you have a Linux system, you can run Python on a Linux machine. So here you have the download button. So you can just click over here, and as you can see, the download has started. And since I have a Windows machine, this will automatically download Python for the Windows machine. Now we have downloaded Python. Apart from that, you'll also need an IDE. So you have different IDEs. One such IDE is Jupyter Notebook. So you can download Jupyter Notebook, or maybe if you want something else, so there is something called as Visual Studio Code. You can also download that. And so there are multiple such options. So whatever you are comfortable with and whatever you find according to your stylistic needs, you can go ahead and use that. And for this purpose, I'm just using Google Colab. So I'm not installing anything in my system. So I'm running this on a cloud-based platform. So also, if you do not want to install Python into your system, and if you're just new to programming and don't really understand how to install all of these softwares, you can just go ahead and type Google Colab and then open this new tab, and then you can start coding from here. So we'll start off with a very simple command. I'll type print. Hey, that's very simple, isn't it? Let me make sure the spelling is correct. I'll type in print over here, and I'll just write down welcome to PamTen, and I'll hit enter. And you see that we have successfully written our first command in Python. You have welcome to PamTen. Now, this seems very simple. So we'll go ahead and understand more things in Python. So Python is a language which is used for multiple purposes. So you can use Python for data analytics, data science. You can use Python for also developing web-based applications or desktop applications. And since with the advent of AI, Python is what is primarily used, and that is why we'll be using Python throughout this entire data science series. We've just printed our first command. Now, whenever we are dealing with data, we need to store the data somewhere. So we'll start off with the simplest type of data, which are basically variables. Now, let's say if you had to store the number of chocolates. So if you're given maybe chocolates, and if you were to store the count of those chocolates, what you can do is you can create something called as a data type or a variable. And here I'm creating a variable called as count chocolate, and in this I'll store the value 10. Now I can just go ahead and print this out. So I'm just using this same variable name over here so that I can print this. And you see that I have stored this value 10 inside this variable and I have printed this out. Now this is called a variable because you can change the value which is present inside this. So I'll just type in count chocolate again, and then instead of 10 I'll store a value of 20, and again I'll print out this value. Now you see that instead of printing 10, this variable will print the value of 20. So this is how variables works. You can change whatever is present inside it. Now, it's not necessary that you have to only store values of numeric in this type. So instead of storing a numeric value, you can also store something else. So instead of 20, I can maybe store something like 10 chocolates. And then if I print this out, you will see that the value 10 chocolates have been stored inside found chocolate and that has been printed out. So this is a variable. Now we have something called as a data type. So every variable has a data type associated with it. Now initially we stored, so I'll have a variable called as A. Inside this I'll store 10, and now when I print out A, this is a value which is printed. And if I look at the type of this, so I'll just have this command called as type and I'll print this over here, and you will see that this is of integer type. Now I can go ahead and change this value from 10 to 10.4, and then I'll go ahead and print this. You will see that this has been changed to float. So float is used to determine your decimal point values. Now instead of 10.4, I'll go ahead and change this to maybe a string. So string is something you can represent using single quotes or double quotes or even triple quotes. So I'll start by using a single quote, and inside this I'll store hello, and here you'll see that the type is of string. Now instead of single quotes, again I can use double quotes and I'll use hey, and again you shall see that this is a string. So these are the different types. Instead of this, we can also have something called as a Boolean type. So Boolean is, you only get two options over here. It's either true or false. I'll store true inside this, and here you have to keep in mind that T is capital. So the first letter in true is capital. I'll check the type of this, and this is of type bool, which stands for Boolean. Now instead of false, I'll change this. Instead of true, I'll change this to false. I'll print this, and again you will see that the type of this is bool. So these are the very basics or very fundamentals in Python, where we've looked at what are variables, what are data types, we've stored some values inside our variables, and we have printed those out. And now, after this, what you can do is we can go ahead and work with some basic arithmetic operations. So I'll just go ahead and add a comment over here. So comments are something which are not executed by your Python interpreter. So that is not taken as a code. So this is just for your reference. So here I will type something called as arithmetic operators, and when I hit enter you will see that nothing happened. Now if I actually remove this hash from here and I try to execute this, you will see that you will get an error, and the error states invalid syntax because there is nothing called as arithmetic operators defined above, because we've just used this as a comment. If we just use this as a comment, then there'll be no error at all. So comments are basically that part of your code which is not executed by your Python interpreter. So we'll go ahead and work with some basic Python operations. What I'll do is I'll have a variable called as num1. Inside num1, I'll store the value 10, and then I'll have something called as num2, and inside num2, I'll store the value 20. Going ahead, I'll just perform very basic operations, which are num1 plus num2, and here you shall see that we have the value 30. Similarly, if I want to subtract this, so num1 minus num2 is minus 10. And if I were to change this, so num2 minus num1, I'll get 10. Going ahead, I can also multiply these two values. So I'll just use the star symbol between these two. Num2 into num1, I get 200. And then num2 divided by num1, I get 2. So these are your basic arithmetic operators. Apart from this, we also have logical operators, which help us to understand which of these is greater. So now, if I try to check if, so this symbol which you see greater than, so I'm basically checking if the value which is present in num2 is greater than the value which is present in num1. And I hit enter, I get a true value because 20 is obviously greater than 10. If I were to change this, if I were to change num2 is less than num1, I get false because 20 is not less than 10. Now I have something called as a double equal to operator. So this will give me the true result if both the values are same, and this will give me a false result if both the values are different. So I'm basically checking if both the values present in these variables are same or not. I'll hit enter and you will see that I get a false value because 20 is not equal to 10. So these are some of our operators. Now we shall go ahead and we'll work with some data structures. So our first data structure is a string. So we have looked at what a string is and how we can store these string values. Now we'll do further more operations on this. So I'll call this as str1, and inside this, maybe I can just add PamTen. I'll go ahead and print this out. So I'm printing out str1 over here. So what we get as a result, which is PamTen. Now going ahead, if I want to extract the first letter from this string, what I can do is we have something called as slicing or indexing. So I'll give in the name of the variable, which is str1. I'll use these square braces and I shall give in 0. Now, for Python, you have to understand that the indexing starts with number 0. So the character which is present at the first position is index 0. Character which is present at position 2 is index 1. Character which is present at index 3 is your at position 3 is index 2. So this is how it goes. So if I were to extract the first character from the string, I'll have to give in str1, I'll give in the index which is 0. I hit enter and you shall see that I have extracted P from this. Similarly, if I were to extract the last letter from this, there are two ways to do this. So I can just go ahead and give in -1. So if I give in -1 over here, well, this seems to be taking a lot of time. You see that I have extracted the last letter, which is N, or I can just count. So this will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the last character is present at index number 5. I'll give it 5 over here. And again, you shall see that I have extracted this. So if I were to extract a series of characters from this, I can use something like this. So if I were to extract only PAM, what I can do is I can start from the index 0 and I can have 0, 1, and 2. But here I'll give in 3. And let's look at the result. So you have seen that I've extracted PAM from PamTen. And why did I give 3 over here instead of 2? Because this, which you give after the colon over here, that is not inclusive. The value which you give before the colon, that is inclusive, and the value which you give after the colon is not inclusive. So when you state 0, colon, 3 or 0 till 3, you're basically extracting values which are present at 0th index, first index, and second index, but you are not including the value which is present at the third index. Now, if I were to extract maybe the entire, there is another way of extracting this. Instead of giving a 0 over here, I can just give in colon 3. I will extract this. If I were to extract maybe the first 4 characters, I can give something like this, and I've extracted PAM. So this is how we can do slicing and dicing from a string. And maybe if I would convert this entire thing into lowercase, I have something called as to upper. Let's see if this is the command. Seems like this is not the command. We'll try and see to lower. Oh, this is just lower. So I have str1 dot lower, and you see that capital P over here and the capital T over here, both of them have been changed to lowercase. Similarly, instead of lower, I'll change this to upper, and you see that this PamTen has been changed to PamTen, where every letter is capitalized. So this is how we can work with basic strings in Python. Now that we are done with this, we can also go ahead and look at other data structures. So your primary data structures in Python are tuple, and then we have something called as a list, then we have something called as a dictionary, then we have a set. So now we'll start off by working with tuples. So if you were to create a tuple, I'll have a variable called as up1. And if I were to create a tuple, I'll use these braces, these round braces over here, and I'll store values. Now I can store values of different types inside this. So I'll have the first value as a 1, I'll have the second value as a, and I'll have the third value as true, and I'll go ahead and print tup1 over here, and you shall see that I've successfully printed this. So this is a tuple. Now you have to understand that a tuple is immutable. That is, if I try to change any of the values which are present inside this, I cannot do that. So let's say if I want to change the value which is present in the 0th index. So up1 of 0 equal to, maybe if I were to change the value from 1 to, you shall see that I get an error. So this is the problem when it comes to tuples. So instead of tuple, we can use something called as a list, which is a mutable data structure. That means we can change the values which are already stored inside a list. So here, I'll go ahead and create a list called as L1, and inside this, I'll have 1, A, and true. Let me go ahead and print L1 over here. Now, if I were to do the same thing, I'll take L1, I'll have the 0th index, and in the 0th index, instead of the value 1, I'll change it to 2. And going ahead, I'll also print this. You see that initially the value which was present at the 0th index was 1. Now I have used this operation and changed the value to 2 instead of 1. So this is how tuples and lists work. I can also do some very simple operations over here. So let's say if I were to maybe add another value to this, what I can do is I have something called as an append command. So I'll have L1 dot append. Maybe I'll add a value called as a there, and now when I print in L1, you see that I've successfully added hey there inside this list. And if I were to remove the last element, I have another command called as pop. So here I shall write down L1 dot pop. I've executed there, and you see that the last element, which was hey there, has been popped out. Now let me print out L1, and you shall see that it does not comprise hey there inside the list. So this is how your list works. Going ahead, we have something called as a dictionary, and dictionary basically comprises of key and value pairs. Now here your keys have to be distinct, but your values can be same. So let me go ahead and create a dictionary over here. I'll call this D1, and you create a dictionary by using these curly braces. So I'll call the first key as K1, and I'll give it a value of 1. I'll have another key called as K2, give it a value of 2. I'll have the third key as K3, and I shall give it a value of 3. Now I shall go ahead and print D1 out, and you shall see that I've successfully created this dictionary. After this, if I want to look at only the keys which are present, so I have a method called as keys. And you have to remember that all of the methods or all of the functions have to be followed with these braces. Since keys is a method, I'm using these braces. So d1 dot keys, and you see that I have successfully extracted or printed only the keys from this dictionary. Similarly, if I wanted only the values from this dictionary, instead of keys, I'll go ahead and type in values, and you shall see that I have extracted only the values from this dictionary. And now, if I wanted both the key and the value, I have something called as item. So I'll type in d1 dot items, and when I print this out, you shall see that k1 is the key, 1 is the value, k2 is the key, 2 is the value, and so on. So this is how a dictionary works. And after that, we have a set. I'll call my first set as S1, and again, sets are created by using these curly braces. And one interesting feature about a set is you cannot have duplicate values inside a set. First, I'll just create a set by having these three values, 1, 2, and 3, and I'll print out set. Well, nothing really interesting about this. But now I'll go ahead and modify this. Instead of having 1, 2, and 3, what I'll do is I'll have 1, 1, I'll have 2 and 2, I'll have 1 again, I'll have 3, I'll have 1, 2, and 3. Now when I print out S1, you shall see that I only have 1, 2, and 3. All of the duplicates have been removed from the set. And this is not just with respect to Python. So whatever language you are using, in that if you have something called as a set, then all the values which are present in a set will be unique. So this is actually a mathematical concept. There is something called as a set in maths. And if you're working with a set, all the values inside a set will be unique. So these are some basic data structures when it comes to Python. Now going ahead, we shall work with looping statements and flow control statements. So these flow control statements are used whenever you have to make a decision. So if A happens, do something. Else, if B happens, do something else. So this is how your if-else logic or flow control statement logic works. Now, what I'll do is I'll have two values over here. I'll store the value 10 inside A, and then I'll store the value 20 inside B, and I'll just check if A is greater than B, do something. So if A is greater than B, I will go ahead and print out A is greater. And if that is not the case, else. So if this were to become false, I'll come to the else statement over here and I'll print B is greater. So I'll go ahead and execute this and let's see what the solution will be. And you see that I get the result B is greater. So this is because first the check happens here if A is greater than B. So is 10 greater than 20? No. Since that is false, I directly come to this else statement over here, and inside else I'm checking if the other case. So A is not greater than B, and if that is false, I just go ahead and whatever is present inside else. So inside else B is greater, and that is what I'm printing out over here. If there were multiple options, so let's say if I have maybe X, Y, and Z, X is 10, Y is 20, and Z is 30. And if I were to check which is the largest value among these three, I have something called as if, else if, and else. So I can use these three in conjunction to find out which of three is the biggest. So I'll go ahead and write this command. If X is greater than Y and X is greater than Z, what I can do is print X is the greatest. If this is not the case, I can go ahead and give in another condition, which is if Y is greater than X and Y is greater than Z, I can go ahead and print out Y is the greatest. And if this also comes out to be false, I can write in the final else statement and I can print out Z is the greatest. So let's print this out and you shall see that we have the result C is the greatest. So what happened over here is we came here at the first check condition if 10 is greater than 20 and 10 is greater than 30. So is that the case? No. Both of these return false and that is why we're printing out. So that is why we exclude this. Then we go ahead and check if y is greater than 10 and y is also greater than 30. 20 is greater than 10 but 20 is not greater than 30. And since this becomes false, we also exclude this. And since both of these are false, we directly come to the else statement and print whatever is present inside the else statement. So inside the else statement, we have Z is the greatest, and that is what we print out over here. And this is how your if-else statements work. Now, we have also something called as looping statements. So if I were to repeat something, we can use these looping statements. So there is a looping statement called as while. Now what I'll do is, if I want to maybe print out the numbers from 1 to 10, so initially I'll store a variable called as I, and inside I'll store the value 1, and I'll use this command called as while, or this loop called as while, and inside while I'll given this condition while I is less than or equal to 10. So while I is less than or equal to 10, what do I need to do? I need to print out the value of I and increment the value of I by 1, and let's see what happens over here. So you see that we have successfully printed the values 1 to 10 using this while loop. What happened over here was, initially the value of I is equal to 1. We check if 1 is less than or equal to 10. Since that is true, we print out 1 and then increment the value of I by 1. I becomes 2. Here we check if 2 is less than 10. That is true. Again, we increment the value, print out 2. Is 3 less than 10? Yes, we print out 3. Again, we increment the value. Is 4 less than 10? Yes, and we print out. And this goes on till I becomes 11 and this condition fails. When this condition fails, we come out of the loop. So this is how your while loop works. And then we also have something called as a for loop. So normally your for loop works in conjunction with your data structures. So if you want to iterate through your data structures, that is when we normally use a for loop. So here, if I were to have a list, so I'll have a list called as, let's call this L2. And inside this list, I'll just have random objects. So I'll have obj1, I'll have obj2, I'll similarly create more such objects. I'll copy this, print this over here, I'll change this to 4, and I shall change this to 3. So I have L2 over here. I'll also print out L2 for you guys. This is what we get. Now, if I were to print out each object or each item which is present inside this list, I can just use the for loop. I'll give for item in L2. I'll just go ahead and print each item. And you see that we have successfully printed out obj1, obj2, 3, and 4. Here what happens is, for each iteration, we store the value of that item in this variable. So initially, we have this obj1 inside item. Then we have obj2 inside item, and then this goes on. Now, since we've understood all the basic concepts over here, we'll go ahead and do some basic problems with these flow control statements. So we'll do a simple pattern problem. So this is something, if these were asked maybe around 5 or 6 years back in coding interviews. So if you're at a very basic level and want to understand these patterns, then this could be a really good example for you. So here what I want to do is, I basically want to create a code which will print out something in a pattern. So here I'll maybe have a variable called as I. So for I in 5. So what I'm basically trying to do over here is, I want to print something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll just copy paste this stuff. So I want to print out something like this. Ignore the hash over here, and I want to print this simple pattern. How do I do this? Well, for this, we would need something called as nesting of for loops. So we'll have one for loop inside another for loop. So I'll type for I in range of 5. So range is a method which you can use to basically iterate over a range or go over a range. So here range of 5 would basically mean that your I values will go from 0 to 4. 5 is exclusive. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now inside this for loop, I'll have another for loop, and this again shall go in the range of 0 to 4. So for J10 range of 5, what do I need to do? I need to print out a star. So I'll just give in a star over here, and I need to print this out 5 times. And after printing this out 5 times, so basically I need, so you have an additional attribute called as end. I'll talk about it once I write this complete code. Then going ahead, I'll have another print statement, which just helps me to add a new line. Now let me print this entire thing and let's see what is the result. You see that with this simple code, by using just two for loops, I've been able to print out this pattern. Now let's understand this code properly. So over here, this is my outer loop. And this outer loop goes from the values of 0 till 4. And this inner loop again goes from the values of 0 to 4. So initially, the value of I is 0 and the value of j is 0. So I is 0, j is 0, and I'll print out the first star over here. This end is equal to this double quotes over here basically means that instead of instead of just printing and then going to the next line, what I'll do is after I print something, I'll just add a space to it. Now, if I were to just use the print statement, whatever is printed after it will come in the next line. So instead of having whatever is printed in the next line, I wanted to follow the previous value. So this is why I use this. So let's say instead of this, maybe if I were to give two spaces, I'll have two spaces after each star over here. So I'll print this. We shall see that I have two spaces after each star. Now, if I were to maybe remove this end, you shall see that after each particular star, everything will come in a new line, right? So you see that I have these 5 stars and each star is coming in a new line. And also here, I have these two spaces over here. This is after a new line. So that is why if I want this to continue in the same line, I'll use the end parameter and I'll print it like this. And now, so this is how we can print out a basic pattern program. Now let's try and modify this. Now, instead of printing like this, what if I wanted to maybe print the values? So I will have 1111 over here, 2222, 3333, and so on. Let's try and figure that out. So for this, what I'll do is I'll have something called as a count, and I'll set the value of count to be equal to 1. Now, what I want to do is instead of this star value, I'd want to print out count, and after each, after printing one value inside a line, I would want to increment the value of count by 1. So here you shall see that I've incremented the value of count by 1, and I've printed once, 5 ones in the first line, 5 2s in the second line, 5 3s in the second line, and so on. Again, similar logic is followed here. The first for loop goes from 0 to 5. Second for loop goes from 0 to 5. Initially, value of I is 0. Value of j is also 0. So here, till I, so initially I is 0, j is 0, and j goes from 0 to 4. So while j goes from 0 to 4, I keep on printing 1, 1, 1, 1. Now, we exit out of this inner for loop and come back to the outer for loop, and I is incremented from 1 to 2. And when I is incremented from 1 to 2, again j's value becomes 0. So here again j goes from 0 till 4, and again we print out the value of count, which is 2 now. Again we exit the inner for loop, we go to the outer for loop, and inside the outer for loop I value is incremented, it becomes, and this is how your entire for loop works. So, friends, in this first series of data science with Python, we understood all of the basics of Python. We work with data type and operators. We also worked with some of your data structures, which are strings, tuples, lists, dictionaries, and set. And then we also understood flow control statements, which were your if else decision making statements. And then we also work with looping statements, which were while and for. So going ahead further in the series, we have a lot of things planned. So up ahead in the next one, what we'll do is we'll do more problem solving in the next video. After that, we'll understand what is object-oriented programming in Python, because we have to make everything independent. So when we use object-oriented programming, we can just use these classes and invoke something else. After that, we'll do some data manipulation and data visualization with Python. Then we'll finally dive into statistics and machine learning. So Thank you very much for watching this video. And if you have any further recommendations on what you expect us to do, you can just write in the comment section, and we'll definitely follow that. If you like this video, do hit the like button and share it with your friends, and also subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much, and I'll meet you folks in the next one.